Hello, and welcome back to biology. So today what we want to talk about are cells. And we've been talking about gametes and things like that and how gametes fuse. And so in this unit, we haven't talked about how they fuse. We're going to do that in this unit. But in this unit, what we really want to talk about are cells and how cells will replicate and how we make gametes. And then, of course, what about offspring? What are the choices? What are some of the reproductive strategies? What are parenting strategies? Things like that. But today what we want to talk about is the cell. But before we do that, let's talk about eggs, right? And so when we say egg, we have something in mind, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when I say egg, I'm talking about the gamete that is produced by the female. It's a haploid cell, and it has everything that you need to make a complete fertilized egg, a zygote, right? Except the other half of the chromosome set from the male, right? But it's got all the mRNA, it's got all the proteins, mitochondria, all the rest of the organelles, all that stuff is in the egg ready to go. Now, when we think of eggs, we tend to think of like the chicken eggs that we like to eat, maybe like to eat duck or quail or whatever. But we think about these eggs that provide delicious nutrition for us. But really what you're looking at when you look at the egg is you're looking at the support system for that little haploid cell that is going to become the fertilized egg once it fuses with the sperm. So the yolk, for instance, provides nutrients to the egg, and then you have some other structures in here that including the shell, that'll facilitate the removal of waste, that'll allow for gases to be released to the atmosphere to diffuse into and out of the egg, and so all kinds of stuff. But when we talk about cells, right, once you have that fusion of the sperm and the egg, you now have a fertilized egg, and that is going to begin to divide, right, to undergo cellular reproduction, and it's going to eventually become some sort of little baby something, right? But before we talk about the cell itself, like what is it? Once you get like this whole cell action, what is a cell? Before we do that, I just want to show you that there are all kinds of eggs out there, and little baby cases, if you will. And so I think these are really cool. Insects, I think, have some of the coolest eggs, and egg cases is what these are called. But you can see the egg and all of the nutrients and all that stuff is going to be inside this shell-like thing, if you will. And I think these are pretty neat. This is a praying mantis. There are probably, I don't know, 1,000 little praying mantis eggs that have been fertilized in here. So here are some fish. Now in this case you can see this is pretty late in development, but these little fish are bound by this cute little membrane, and then you have little goldfish hanging out in there, and here's some more little goldfish, very cute. But you can see there's a little egg, and basically you get this little thing that grows in this confined space. And then fish have some really cool eggs, specifically shark. These are all shark eggs, and I think they're really, really neat. This I think is actually called a mermaid's purse. So cool. And then amphibians, right? It's a little frog action, and they have these cool mucousy spit bubble things that hold their eggs because they have to stay moist. Eggs have to stay moist because gas exchange has to be across a moist membrane, and so amphibians and fish do that by having their eggs in water. Everybody else has to have some sort of hard or at least leathery, dry, waterproof case that is around it. And these are, of course, reptiles. Here's some more cute little reptiles. What's cuter than a baby turtle or baby lizard, seriously? And then here's a whole variety of bird eggs. Very cool stuff there. And here's more, right? They come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. If you look at this golden eagle right here, you know, this is going to be a pretty big egg, whereas a sparrow is going to be really kind of not very big at all. Yeah. Okay, and then there are two egg-laying mammals, the monotremes, and they're the earliest of the mammals. The only two remaining are the platypus and the echidna, and that's a baby echidna hatching, and these are some baby platypus. You'd think they'd be cuter, but there you go. Okay, so there's a little bit about eggs. So let's talk about the cell. The cell is the smallest unit of life. And cell theory really is based on three ideas. One, that all living things are made up of cells. Now, it could just be one cell, right? Because cells are the smallest working units of all living things. Here's the other thing, and I think this last thing is something I really want you to think about. All cells come from pre-existing cells through cell division. That means every cell is a daughter of a cell before it. There aren't just like a new cells out of nothing. They're all coming from other cells. And that's actually a really cool thing, the way life perpetuates itself that way. Some examples of cells, here's an amoeba, right? Here's a plant stem, there's a little red blood cell, here's some bacteria, and this is a really cool nerve cell. And of course, some of these are standalone, right, like these guys. They're not part of anything else, they're individuals, and these are specialized cells that are a part of a larger body, right, something that's multicellular. But regardless of the kind of cell, you can divide them up into 3 basic cell types. You've got animal cells, which are the ones that we're going to be most concerned about. You have plant cells, we're going to talk about those, and then we have our bacteria cells, or our prokaryotes. So here's your first question. Why is a bacterium classified as a prokaryote? It has no DNA, it has no membrane-bound nucleus, it has cilia, or it is a single cell. Well, you can say that the first one is right out, right? All cells have DNA. All cells have DNA. It does, some bacteria have cilia, some don't. Cilia is not a thing that makes you a prokaryote, it's just a thing that lets you move around. Single cells, they can come in all sorts of types. But the thing about prokaryotes is 2. It has no membrane-bound nucleus, and as a matter of fact, it doesn't have a nucleus at all, really. It just has a cluster of DNA in the center, and I'm going to show you a picture. But basically, prokaryotes are the earliest of cells. They are unicellular. They have no membranes other than the membrane that surrounds it. Okay, they have very few internal structures, and they're all prokaryotes. They're going to be bacteria and archaea. Okay, all right. And here is a nice little picture of a. This is a bacillus shape, right? And then this is a coccus shape, and then this is a spirochete, I think. There are actually 2, spirillum and spirochetes. You don't need to know that. But so you have all these different shapes of bacteria. It's actually quite cool. Basically, though, you have this little membrane. You may have cilia, you may have flagella, you may have more than, you have one flagella, lots of flagella, whatever. But inside, you're going to have not nuclear membrane. You're going to have what's called the nucleoid region, and that's where all the DNA is going to be. It's all kind of clustered together. You're going to have ribosomes. Okay, so other than the cytoplasm, those are going to be the only things, and we'll come back to that in a second. Most of the things that we think about are eukaryotes. Okay, they're eukaryotic cells, and those can be either unicellular or multicellular. Prokaryotes are always unicellular. Okay, so if you have something that's made up of more than one cell, it's going to be a eukaryote. And these have nuclei that are bound by membranes, plus they have organelles. Okay, and that's really going to be your protists. Those are your unicellular eukaryotes, plants and animals, and then also fungi. Although, as a side note, fungi can be unicellular or multicellular. Okay, so eukaryotic cells, they actually come in 3 kinds. They come in plants, animals, and fungi. We're only going to talk about plants and animals. But anyway, this is a general kind of overview of a eukaryotic cell, and we're going to talk about each of these things in just a second. All right, so here you have on one side you have plant cells, and on the other side you have animal cells. This is just kind of a mashed up picture, but basically it's a list of all the organelles and all the things that you're going to find in each of these. But let's start off with a question. I want to highlight the difference. There are 2 things that you're going to find in plant cells, but not in animal cells, and they are chloroplasts and the cell wall. Okay, bacteria do have cell walls, animal cells don't, but your plants are going to have your chloroplasts. All right, so why are cells so small? First of all, cells are going to need a sufficient surface area to allow for the transport of nutrients in and waste out, okay? But as you increase the volume of the cell, the surface area to volume ratio is not changing proportionally, and so eventually you have too much volume and not enough surface area. And so cells are really going to be limited by that surface area to volume ratio. Otherwise, they can't get enough nutrients and they can't put their waste out. There are a couple of strategies that I think are cool. So you remember I showed you all those different shapes of bacteria? Part of those fall into those strategies for increasing surface area so the cells can be larger, like being long and narrow or having like frilly little edges like amoeba and stuff like that. But basically, round cells are always going to be very small. They'll be the smallest of the cells. So let's talk about basic cell structure. So first of all cells, regardless of what kind they are, have four main components. They have a plasma membrane, they have a cytoplasm that has ribosomes, they have a region containing DNA, and they all have biochemical molecules and biochemical pathways, right? And so you've got all your cell signaling and all of that stuff. That's going to go on regardless of what kind of cell it is, okay? Now, the first thing that they all share is this plasma membrane, and it controls and enters what leaves the cell. It is made, you have this lovely phospholipid bilayer here, and then you've got proteins and with some carbohydrate chains and things like that that are stuck into or all the way through this member, and they act as channels and receptors and all sorts of stuff, and it's actually really, really neat stuff. Okay, so you're told that you see some cells on a microscope, and the cells are either going to be plant, animal, or bacterial. And when you look at them, you see that they have cell walls and membrane-bound organelles. You conclude that the cells are any of those, either plant or bacterial, because they have that cell wall. Are animal cells? No. Are bacteria or are plant cells? Well, the big key here for distinguishing between plant and animal is going to be cell walls, because even though bacteria have cell walls, bacteria do have cell walls, animals don't, so that knocks animals right out. Now you have this membrane-bound organelle. Bacteria don't have that because they are prokaryotes, so the answer is they must be plant cells because they are eukaryotes with cell walls. Okay, so the cell wall, which you're finding in plants and bacteria, algae as well, is going to have this kind of rigid outer structure, and it provides this strength and rigidity that protects the cell from pressure that's caused by the movement of water. Because remember, plants are having water go up through them. They have these big dead cells that form these channels within them that are basically like giant straws, but these streams for water and nutrients to go up and down. And so that maintaining that water pressure is really important. The cell wall helps do that. And then there's another feature I'll talk about in just a second. Now the cytoplasm, everybody's got it. The organelles have this like jelly-like substance that is primarily made of water, and everything floats around in it within the plasma membrane. Now, there are a couple of different organelles that we want to talk about. This is a list. We are going to start with the nucleus, because this is where you find the DNA. This is like the brain, the instruction center, all this good stuff. And I have to tell you, I love this picture. These are some HeLa cells, and this green is the cytoskeleton, which is what gives the cell its support, and then the red in the center is the nucleus. But these are microtubules. They're little and actin filaments too, but these are little tubes that act like this kind of skeleton actually. And then here you see the nucleus up here again, and it's a lot darker because it's got all that DNA in it. This is where you're going to have DNA synthesis, and it's where you're going to have transcription and processing of RNA. Okay, now within the nucleus is the nucleolus, and it's this area of condensed DNA, and this is where ribosomal RNA is going to be transcribed, and it's going to leave, like all the rest of the RNA, the nucleus through nuclear pores. Okay, so the nuclear membrane is where those nuclear pores are, and this is just the membrane that surrounds all that DNA, including the nucleolus. The mitochondria, this is the next really important thing. This is the energy machinery, basically, okay? And so this is where respiration is going to be going on. Now, the mitochondria do actually contain DNA, and they can replicate themselves. And so this made scientists start to think that perhaps the mitochondria actually started out not as an organelle, but as its own thing. And so that brings us to the endosymbiote theory. And that is that this was probably a purple bacteria of some sort, like, purple sulfur bacteria or whatever, that began as an infection of a eukaryotic cell and became a symbiotic relationship because this little guy was doing respiration and making ATP, and it's great, and so it ended up working out, and now it's just the way. All eukaryotic cells have mitochondria, and they are the little powerhouses of the cell. Okay. Now ribosomes, everybody's got ribosomes. We've talked about those before. Those are made of ribosomal RNA, and they are the protein-making machines. All right, so here's your next question. Organelles other than the nucleus that contain DNA will include ribosomes, mitochondria, chloroplasts and mitochondria, ribosomes, mitochondria, and chloroplasts. Clearly, it's going to be something about those three. Ribosomes are actually made of RNA or DNA? RNA. So ribosomes have nothing to do with DNA. They're all about RNA. They translate messenger RNA. They are made of ribosomal RNA. We know mitochondria have DNA because we just talked about it, okay? And then chloroplasts actually also have DNA, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the answer is chloroplasts and mitochondria both have DNA as well. So you've got nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and chloroplast DNA, okay? Now, you also have your endoplasmic reticulum, which is the next organelle that we want to talk about. This is super important. It surrounds the nucleus, and this is where protein synthesis is actually happening. There are ribosomes that fix to the membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum, and they actually are making little proteins. They send them into the endoplasmic reticulum. It is modified within there, and then it's transported to the Golgi apparatus, which is, so this is like a modification plant, right? It's like a little factory. And then the Golgi apparatus is the transportation network. The proteins are sorted. There's some final modifications that go on here. They're packaged into these cute little vesicles, and then they're sent either within the cell or, outside of the cell, because they'll go fuse with the plasma membrane in a process called endocytosis, and all of that will exit. They also make lysosomes, which are really important. They're like the housekeeping of the cell. And so if you can think about it, it's like your digestive system. They digest proteins, fats, carbohydrates, foreign bodies that are coming into the cell. But when you think of a lysosome, it's basically a little sac full of enzymes that break stuff down. And that could be, like I said, foreign invaders. It could be organelles that are dysfunctional or dead or whatever, and they can actually go through and destroy the entire cell itself. One of the steps in a process called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. Cells have a lifespan. At the end of that, they actually end up undergoing apoptosis, programmed cell death, and they're broken down. Now, the last thing I want to talk about are vacuoles. And, okay, it's not exactly the last thing, but it's almost the last thing. Vacuoles are just like sacks for stuff. They just hold stuff. And so you can have things that have been made by the cell already that are waiting to be used. They can be used for digestion. You can put wastes in them and send them out to the extracellular fluid through that endocytosis process. Now, they happen to be really large in plant cells, and they're filled with fluid, water, right? And that's what helps that turgid pressure that holds plants together. When plants start to lose water, they actually start to wilt because they can't maintain that internal pressure because they don't have enough water to fill this guy up to provide that outward pressure, okay? All right, now here's your question. Which of the following organelles is not involved in the synthesis or modification of new molecules? Vacuoles, ribosomes, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, or the Golgi apparatus? Well, the answer is vacuoles, because all the other three are involved in protein synthesis. Ribosomes make them. They're modified in the endoplasmic reticulum, and they are packaged and sent away and do final modifications in the Golgi apparatus. All right, and then the last organelle is the chloroplast. These are found in plants, algae, and some bacteria. They contain chlorophyll. They're the site of photosynthesis. And so all of that trophic level stuff that we've talked about, the primary producers, it's because of the chlorophyll in the chloroplasts, and they have their own DNA too, remember. And so this is also an endosymbiotic relationship, although instead of starting out as bacteria, the purple bacteria, these guys were cyanobacteria, and they now have a symbiotic relationship with plant cells. Okay, that is a very quick summary of cell structure and a little bit about function. We'll continue to talk about this, but if you have any questions, please let me know in class, and I will see you soon. Thanks for listening.